The X Zone Radio Show with Rob McConnell is largely an opinion talk show. All opinions, comments, or statements of fact expressed by Rob McConnell's guests are strictly their own and are not to be construed as those of the X Zone Radio Show or endorsed in any manner by Rob McConnell, rel-mar McConnell Media Company, the X Zone Broadcast Network, its affiliated networks, stations, employees, or advertisers.
All Hit Radio.
Welcome to the X Zone, a place where fact is fiction and fiction is reality. Now, here's your host, Rob McConnell.
And welcome back to the X Zone. I am Rob McConnell, and we're coming to you from our broadcast center and studios in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada. If you'd like to send me an email, xzone@xzoneradiotv.com, on all social media sites, X Zone Radio TV. And if you'd like to find out about the programming we have available for you 24/7, 365 on the X Zone Broadcast Network, www.xzbn.net. And for the X Zone TV channel on Simul TV, it's channel 21. www.simultv.com. Exonation, my guest this hour is John Lebon. He is an Australian who spends most of his time trying to unravel the lie system into which we're all born. JLB is primarily known for his work on YouTube, which has attracted over 6,000 subscribers since launching in early 2015. Over the past years, JLB has developed and attempted to share a framework he describes as real skepticism, whereby even the most fundamental truths, which most people generally take for granted, are evaluated and empirical and logical basis, and no field of inquiry is considered taboo. Central to this framework is the concept of primary source research methodology, which is explained in detail on his website, which is www.johnlebon.com. Joining me now all the way from Australia is John Lebon, who is affectionately known by friends and colleagues as JLB. And JLB, welcome to the X Zone.
Well, thank you very much for having me. What a terrific introduction, and how magnificent is this technology. You're in Ontario, Canada.
Right.
I'm here in Brisbane, Australia, and we're having a zero latency discussion through our computers. It is phenomenal, isn't it?
It certainly is. And, over the years, I've been doing the show for 29 years now, and to see the technology grow so fast, I can only wonder what my grandchildren's children will be able to accomplish during their days. But let's talk more about you, my friend. Why are you called the world's leading skeptic?
Well, that's what I call myself, and you could argue that it's a cheeky little way to promote oneself. But basically, it seems to me that the way the world is today, there's lots of things that people believe that they never really challenge. They've never even thought to challenge.
Right.
And so some of them are obvious. Things like, say, how did we get here? These days we're told that we got here through human evolution. That could be true.
Right.
We're told that the Earth used to be the home of these giant creatures called dinosaurs. That could be true. And they were wiped out by a meteor, and that could be true. And all these things that could be true. But my philosophy is, why don't we look into the evidence for these stories? Because what happens is at school, we're generally not given the evidence. We're just given these stories.
Right.
So we're taught about dinosaurs. I was taught about dinosaurs in grade 2, which means I would have been 6 or 7 years old. So they're not really teaching you the scientific method at that age. They're just teaching you, well, here is a triceratops, here is a velociraptor, these kinds of things. So what I've been trying to do for the last few years is just go back and look at, well, what is the evidence, what is the official scientific evidence, the official scientific story, and how much of these things would I believe if I was told them today? And it turns out, Rob, that a lot of things I used to believe I no longer believe precisely because I've gone and looked at the evidence.
Well, JLB, is there one specific event that made you a skeptic?
No, not one specific event, but what happened a few years ago, I was just a regular person. I was about 26 or 27, just leading a very regular life here in Brisbane, working a very regular job, which I actually still do work that same job to this day, actually. And then I saw an event, or I saw an analysis of an event that had been on the news earlier that year. And there were some anomalies in this event which made me think, well, hold on, what is going on here? And then I looked further into that one, and within a short period of time, I became convinced that that particular news story was at very best exaggerated, at very best, but at worst, perhaps an outright fabrication. And so that led me to think, well, hold on, if I could have been misled about that event, well, what else could I be misled about? Because up until that point, I mean, everybody knows the news can embellish stories. Everyone accepts that the news is not necessarily a bastion of truth, but most of us think that the news generally will at least try to tell the truth most of the time. But I no longer am convinced that that's the case. I now see the news more like what we see in, say, George Orwell, 1984, where the news, the telescreen, its entire purpose is propaganda. I'm now more of that way of thinking than I was 5 years ago, and I still thought the TV news was relatively true. So to answer your question more directly, there was no one single event, but over time, it's almost like a domino effect. Just one leads to the next, and then 4 or 5 years later, you're sitting here chatting with a gentleman from Ontario, Canada, calling yourself the world's leading skeptic. It all happened so quick. I had no idea 5 years ago what I was exactly getting myself in for.
Is it possible that with the advent of the internet, by the way, I call the internet the largest septic tank that mankind has ever created because there's more crap in it than there is anything else, that due to the success of the internet and the internet stealing a lot of advertising revenue away from mainstream media, that they had to incorporate the dynamics and the methodology that the internet has been known for when it comes to the reporting of news, and that is, if it don't bleed, it don't lead.
Yeah, that's a very good question. I'm not too sure. I mean, I look at the way the news has functioned, and as far as I can tell, the news has always had this, from the time that it was broadcast on radio and then on TV, it's always had this authoritative appeal to people.
Yes.
And I'm starting to learn that most humans, they want an authority to tell them how things are. So whether that is their religious leaders or that is their television news leaders, or more recently, people with their e-celebrities and their Kardashians, most humans seem to want somebody to look up to admire, to try and replicate, to copy, just to make them feel as though someone's got it all worked out. So with the news now, if I'm in the same room as somebody who's watching the 6 p.m. news, I'm kind of looking at that person rather than the news and studying what effect is the news having on them. And they seem to be in a state of hypnosis. And I don't know if you or your listeners have tried this, but I strongly recommend it. Next time you're in a room with people watching TV, just spend a few moments watching the people who are watching the TV, and you might notice that these people, they're not watching the news interactively. They're quite seriously just sitting there passively being told how things are. And it's almost like they're under hypnosis, is what it seems like to me.
Well, I still firmly believe, and in fact there's a couple of surveys that have concluded the same thing, that not only are we still getting subliminal information on the televisions, but now we're getting subliminal information, poured at us and triggered to us on the internet.
Yeah, well, there are those studies or those articles talking about how maybe websites like Facebook are kind of doing their own A/B testing.
Yep.
That is, they'll show one set of information or posts to one set of users, and then a different set of information or posts to a different set of users to study their reactions. Now, I don't know if that is true or not, but it seems plausible to me. And in marketing, this is literally what people do. So what will happen is, suppose your website notices that this particular user is more likely to click on articles or thumbnails for articles that look like this or sound like this. They will start to tailor those articles and those thumbnails to that user. So in other words, they learn about their user base, and then they start doing effectively their own A/B splits. That is, the more they know about you, the more they tailor their own content to you specifically to make you more likely to click. we're seeing this already. This is just part of this is part of internet. This is part of the world today, as things already are.
Do you think that Google and Facebook and all its subsidiaries are getting too much power?
I don't know about too much power, because originally I had this idea that, there's an idealistic way the world should be. And so I went through this phase a few years ago of almost like a conspiracy theorist sort of, they're getting too much power there. The Facebook and Google are, manipulating their users, these kinds of things. These days, I've got a more circumspect opinion, because I know people who, they're fully aware of what Facebook can do. They're fully aware of Instagram and the effect that social media has on them, but they still willingly use these services. So is it necessarily a bad thing? Is the Facebook, I don't personally use Facebook, but does that mean that Facebook is a bad thing? Well, if someone uses Facebook and they feel as though it's worth keeping in their life, who am I to say, well, that's wrong? And of course, Facebook has millions, supposedly 1 billion users, something like this. If this is a two-way interaction, all the users like Facebook, and Facebook is using this information for their own purposes, I no longer say, well, that's necessarily wrong or too much power. It is what it is. I don't personally use Facebook, and I would suggest to people who've never tried to take a break from Facebook, give it a try and see if you notice a difference in your life. I think you will. But if they come back to me and they say, nope, I miss Facebook, I want to use it, cool, why not? I mean, as long as it's making you happy.
Sure, John, stand by, please. We've got to take our first break. X Zone Nation, our guest this hour is John Laban. His website is www.johnlaban.com. This is the X Zone. I am Rob McConnell. We're coming to you from our broadcast center and studios in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada. We'll both be back after this short break. Don't go away. John Laban is my special guest this hour. X Zone Nation, www.johnlaban.com. John, can you tell us a little bit about the hoax hierarchy?
Sure. So what I've done is I've put together a schematic, like an image that people can look at to see what I'm trying to convey. And I think that of the hoaxes that are going on in the world today, some of them are more significant than others. Now, of course, the first step is to accept that there are hoaxes going on today, which for a lot of people is too much of a step to take. But there is a group of us on the internet, and we seem like we're growing in numbers, not fast, and we'll never be the majority of people, but there's a growing number of people who seem to understand that, yes, there are a few deceptions in the world today. So I'm reticent to specifically name any of them without knowing too much about your audience, but basically people like me, we think that perhaps some of what we're told about the space missions, they might be a joke, they might be a hoax, perhaps, possibly.
So we're talking about the lunar landing cover-up and conspiracy.
Sure, things like the moon landing, things like the International Space Station, things like more recently the Mars lunar lander, these kinds of things.
Right.
I happen to think that these are all fake stories, and I know that this is a very controversial opinion, because people will usually come back and say, well, how could they fake this? Why wouldn't the other governments around the world dob them in? And then, of course, my response is, who convinced you that the world is run by lots of different governments? And most people operate on the framework of, there's Chinese government, there's American government, there's an Australian government. These are all completely separate, running their own nations, which is exactly what I used to think. But what happened was a few years ago, I started reading books like 1984 by George Orwell, and Animal Farm by George Orwell, and Brave New World by Aldous Huxley. And I didn't just watch the movies or listen to the audiobooks. I actually sat down and read the books and tried to understand how much of this is allegory or metaphor, and how much of this actually does apply to today. And I look at the way the world operates and I think, well, hold on, I'm speaking to a gentleman in Canada. There's absolutely nothing in between our conversation. It's just you and me. And we can do this whenever we like, and so can anyone with the internet. Who convinced me that there are these national governments who are controlling their own people? It seems to me as though we already live in a globalized world, almost like a one world, and the governments almost seem like little more than caretakers of the people. They're almost like it's almost like it's there for show. But in reality, we're already under a one world system. We all can do banking together.
Yeah.
Like I could send you money on PayPal instantly and vice versa. We're talking instantly. We use the same language, most of us. English is either a first or a second language for most of the world already, especially with younger people.
Right.
So I'm no longer convinced that there's all these different governments trying to control their own people. It now seems to me as though the so-called governments of the world, they're all pretty much on the same team. And then the next response you get is, well, how about all of the wars? If they're all on the same team, how can we get all of these wars between people? And then I say, well, once again, just to use it as a thought experiment, as a way to introduce these ideas, consider 1984 by George Orwell, which everybody tells me they've read. Everyone says, oh, yeah, I've read that.
Well, why don't
And
you
I say,
explain?
okay,
Why
cool.
don't you explain it to our listeners who may not have read it?
Yeah, okay, cool. So in 1984, this is a book by George Orwell from the 1940s, and it's a lot of people cite this book as like a blueprint for the future, but I think that perhaps George Orwell was just writing about how things already were, even in the 1940s. And so the basic story is that the protagonist, Winston, he lives in this time where he's not really sure what year it is, and most people around him seem like they're very happy just to go along, to get along, but he knows that something's not right. And his job, Winston, is working for the government in the so-called Ministry of Truth. And what he does there is he helps them to change the past. So if there's been a change in government policy, he helps to go back through the old newspapers and change what the previous policy was, so as to not make it obvious that the government is contradicting itself. And of course, I'm sure in your country, just like mine, the government does change its policies and change its claims all the time. And people just go along with it. People don't seem to understand the contradiction or care about it. And anyway, to fast forward, to cut a long story short, over the course of the book, we learn through Winston, the protagonist of the book, of the story, that the world is already run by one group. They have separate governments in different parts of the world to keep the masses in line, to make them think they need their government. And they have wars on the telescreen. That is, they scare their populations by saying, oh, we're at war with East Asia. We're at war with Eurasia. We're always at war. We're constantly at war. That keeps the masses in line. It keeps them thinking they need a government, keeps them thinking that they need to pay taxes to fund the war effort. But in reality, these are fake wars on the telescreen. And so I use this as a way to ask people, well, how much do you really know about the Iraq War, for instance? You see things on your telescreen. You might even know people who were deployed, but how much of that deployment was about actual war, and how much might have been about, say, strategic relocation and demolition? How much of what we think we know about war is truly two or three or different sides fighting each other, and how much of it is something very different, more about occupation of territory rather than actual war? And when I put it all like that, if people are familiar with my work, they might see where I'm going with this. But if someone's new to all of this, Rob, I wouldn't blame them for thinking this guy is crazy.
Tell me your thoughts on the events of September the 11th, 9/11.
Okay, so
was it a hoax or was it real?
I
In your
personally don't believe that there were planes on 9/11, and the reason why I say this is because I used to believe that there were planes, and then I looked into the official story, and the official story is that those planes were traveling at 500 miles per hour into the towers. And I'm not a physicist, so what I did was I looked into, well, what is the physics of flight? And it turns out that these commercial airliners, they can't fly at certain speeds down here at sea level because the air is 3 times as dense. And so what happens is planes fly much slower down here because of the denser air. As they get up to cruising altitude, then they can fly at their cruising speeds. But down here at sea level, even at just a couple hundred miles per hour, even the slightest change to the joystick by the pilot can lead to dramatic changes to the flight of the plane. At 500 miles per hour, officially, a plane can't fly at 500 miles per hour down here at sea level and still be controllable. But if you look at the footage, they look like they're flying at a straight line. So I started studying the actual footage, the footage of the planes, and I noticed some obvious anomalies. They weren't obvious to me when I first saw it because I guess I just didn't even think to question it. But if you look at the footage of the planes now, it is, in my opinion, comical. It's laughable. I think they could have done a much better job with the CGI than they did. But
well, wait a sec.
Okay, hold on here.
Okay, hold on here. Let's just stop here for a second. with all the different cameras from all the different media agencies, as well as people, civilians. I'm in broadcasting, and I would find it very hard to actually, I don't think that it could be done, maybe I'm wrong, but to get all these different pieces of footage, both photographic, video, digital, and compile them in such a manner that they're all using the same CGI files to commit one of the greatest hoaxes of our time.
It seems completely unbelievable, doesn't it? That's exactly what I would have said.
But
so I started looking.
Okay, but let's just go back to the people who lost their lives, including members of my family. So how do we account for them? Where are they if they're not dead?
Well, I wasn't aware that you had family members who had disappeared on September 11. Had I known that,
yeah,
I might not have even broached the
Why?
topic of September
Why?
11 because,
you know, it's your opinion. I would just
Yes.
like to know where the people are. You know, once again, there's members of the New York Fire Department, New York Police Department, the Transport Police, the Port Authority Police, civilians, who, over 3,000 of them, where are they if this was a hoax?
it's an excellent question, and so this is exactly what I looked into.
Mm-hmm.
And first things first, I had several people trying to tell me, well, all of these people died, and so I would say, well, what were their names? Because you can look these names up
Sure.
on the internet,
Yep.
and there are databases where people, say CNN, put together a memorial.
Yeah.
So you look into, well, first of all, how many of these names can we even verify? And in this day and age with the internet, it shouldn't be too difficult to track down some of these names. And time again, I've had people say to me, oh, I had people die on 9/11, you know, people in my family or friends, and I say, cool, what was their name? Because if people did die, let's put together the number of people who we can confirm died, because it could be an exaggerated number. Let's put together the list of people who did die on that day. And without fail, these people can never either give me a name, or when I look up the name, it's not verified by any database, any list of people on the internet. Now, that's not to say that nobody died, because perhaps they did. The towers did come down, so far as I can tell.
Sure.
It appears as though there were two
Well, they're still not
gigantic
there.
towers.
They're still not there, and I've been to those towers before
Yeah,
and
there you go.
after.
So there were these gigantic towers that people have been to, and those towers no longer exist. They came down.
Yep.
So in a massive destruction of buildings like that, it's entirely plausible that people did die. But that doesn't mean necessarily that the planes themselves were real. And so what people like myself suspect is that the planes themselves were faked, and the names that were given of people on those planes, those names are also fake. This is part of a much broader conspiracy, if you want to call it that, a greater deception. But that's not to say that every person who was alleged to have died that day didn't die. But I personally don't believe 3,000, not even close to that number.
Have
Not
you
even close.
have you gone to the 9/11 Center?
Not yet, but you know what? In 2019, I'm coming to the United States, so long as they're going to welcome me in, which I assume they will. I've got a clean criminal record. I'll come to the United States and I'll go and check out New York, and I'll tour it for myself. And anybody who wants to come to me and tell me and testify that they know people who died on 9/11, I'll be more than happy to listen to them. I'm not
All
here
right,
to,
stand by. We've got to take our news break at the bottom of the hour. Exo Nation, our guest this hour is John Lebon, and his website is www.johnlebon.com. We'll be back on the other side of this commercial break with the news as we continue here in the X Zone from our broadcast center and studios in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada. I'm Rob McConnell. Don't go away. Exonation, John Lebon is our guest this hour, www.johnlebon.com. JLB, in your opinion then, if two aircraft did not take down the Twin Towers, what did and why?
Yeah, that's a good question. So in terms of how they brought the towers down, that part I don't know. All I could do is speculate. But with the towers themselves, I'm not sure that they were in use the way that we've all been led to believe. I know some people who have told me, people who I trust, who tell me that they went to the, is it the Windows to the World?
Yes.
There was a restaurant at the top of one of these towers.
Yeah.
So that part, I believe, was in operation. But in between the ground level and the Windows to the World, there were, 100 levels, 110 levels, something like this. How many of those levels were actually in operation and full of office supplies and real people? And this might seem like a strange question, but if people try to imagine in their minds the images that were shown of the rubble following the collapse, how many computers or desks or how much paper or any office material, even carpet, how much do people recall
good Lord.
seeing?
There was tons of paper. Tons of paper. There was tons of ash. You know, are you sure in Australia you saw the same footage we did?
I'm absolutely certain of it. And in fact, there was a person who got into this line of thinking, like how much, where's all the office supplies? Where's the computers? Where's the desks? Where is all of it? Where's the filing cabinets? Where is it all? And so what they did was they called into one of the shows shortly after the event had happened, people covering the topic saying,
Right.
call in, let's discuss what's happened. And he asked one of the experts at the time, hey, I've noticed that there is none of this filing cabinets and all these office supplies. And the response that he was given was to the effect of, oh, well, a lot of this stuff was cleaned up immediately. And it seems to me like an implausible suggestion that the reason why we didn't see computers and filing cabinets and all these things was, oh, they just happened to clean that up straight away. But
how about
do you remember seeing all of these filing cabinets and computers and desks in the rubble?
How about the fact that the heat from the fire was so extensive that it melted? If it could melt steel, like it did on several of the girders that we've seen, it was steel. The heat was so hot. It melted steel. It could easily melt the tin that filing cabinets are made out of, or plastic that computers are made of. I like, come on, that's a little bit far-fetched.
I would have thought so too, but if that's the case, if the fire's going to melt all of the metal of filing cabinets and so forth, how come it didn't melt the passports of the guys who supposedly flew the planes?
I don't know. I don't
Neither
know.
do I.
But you see,
so these are the questions that I ask. Like, to me, this is a line of inquiry that's worth pursuing.
have you asked experts, or you
I
just
wouldn't know which experts to ask.
well, as somebody who's a skeptic and who you did your own research on the flight capabilities of the aircraft at low altitudes, based on a claim that these aircraft were going 500 miles an hour.
That's the official story. yeah.
Okay. So, did you ask anybody who was an avionics expert if it was possible? Number one. Number two, did you ask anybody that very same question about the stationary? Did you ask anybody about the passports? Like,
Well, again, I wouldn't know who
is
to ask.
well, as somebody who is making claims of a significant nature, don't you think you owe it to the people who actually listen to you to look at both sides of the story instead
Well, I
of
see what you're saying.
instead of presenting a slanted story, which like you were at the beginning of the hour, you were telling me that the media doesn't do their job basically, and yet you're doing the exact same thing that you criticize the media for doing.
Well, it wasn't so much that I was saying the media doesn't do their job. I think the media does do their job. I just think their job is different to what I used to believe their job is. Now, in terms of me and my website and my YouTube channel, I offer people my opinions and I say, here's why I'm saying what I'm saying. So in the case of September 11, I've got probably 10 or 15 videos now going through. Here's the official story. Here's what they claim. Here's the part of the official story that I don't agree with. Here's why. Here's the photo footage. Here's the video footage. Here's one of the eyewitnesses who claims to have seen something happen. Do you see the discrepancy in his story? And so on and so forth. But all I'm presenting people is my opinion. And so if I present all of this to someone and they say they disagree, I say that's perfectly fine. It's not my job to convince people.
But how can you disagree without actually doing any hardcore research?
I'm not sure what you mean by hardcore research.
Well, like I said, you're saying that the planes, based on your calculations, could not have been flying at that altitude, at that speed. You're saying a lot of things, and you're throwing in your own opinions instead of saying, well, this is based on this fact. this is what the official story is, but based on this fact, as testified to by ABCD, these are experts in this field, this is the truth. Or this is how I formulate my opinion.
Yeah, so again, I'm not saying to people, this is the truth, this is my opinion. And so, for instance, with the 500-mile-an-hour planes, I'm telling you that is the official story of the event that the planes were flying at. It might have even been closer to 550 miles per hour, but let's round it down and be generous. They're saying 500 miles per hour.
But once again, you did not verify this. You did not contact anyone who was a pilot or an airline company or the manufacturer of an aircraft to see if this is possible. Right?
No, I haven't spoken to any pilots directly, no.
Well,
have you?
I'm not disputing the fact that the towers went down. You know,
No,
not only did I lose family in there, but I'm an ex-police officer. So when I hear of fallen officers that, beyond a shadow of a doubt, died in the line of duty, and I have somebody coming on the show telling me it was a hoax, that it never really happened, I get to tend to say, well, wait a minute, where do you get your information from? Have you verified the information?
Okay, so again, we agree that the towers came down. That part's not in contention.
Definitely.
And then in terms of the planes, I'm telling you the official story is they flew at 500 miles an hour. That's not my opinion. That's the official story.
Well, did you check it with anybody to see if that was possible?
And as I said, I haven't spoken to a pilot. Now, if someone comes to me and they say, oh, I'm a pilot, and we can fly it at those planes at sea level at 500 miles an hour in straight lines into buildings, I say, okay, cool, tell me more. I would love to get a pilot come and tell me these stories.
Well, why don't you go and find one? Why don't you go and find one?
And how would I go about doing that?
Oh, come on.
Hanging out at the lobby of
I'm not going to tell you how to do your
and
job.
saying, hey, mate, can I just doorstop you and ask you your opinion on this?
All you need to do is call up the manufacturer, Boeing, and say, listen, I'm doing research on the 9/11 project. It says in the official commissioned report, is this a fact? Can this plane do this? Because I'm under the understanding it can't. What's so hard about that? That's journalism 101.
That's a fair question.
That's journalism 101.
Well, I don't claim to be a journalist, but on the flip side, have you done this to see if they can fly at 500 miles an hour at sea level in straight lines?
I'm not disputing the fact that they can or they can't. I'm not saying they can or they can't on air. You're the one who is going on the internet, posting this information, coming on a radio show, saying this information without any proof. So it's my job as a broadcaster and an investigative reporter to ask you at this point, why didn't you do due diligence before making this comment?
Well, this is my opinion. This is the whole idea. So I have an opinion. Now, if someone says to me, my opinion is the planes can fly at 500 miles an hour, I say, okay. I don't grill them on it, but I know you've just told me yourself that you haven't checked this either. So neither of us have spoken to a pilot. So all we're left with is the evidence that we've been given, the official story of 500 miles an hour and the video footage. And I'm telling you that based on those things, my opinion is the planes didn't exist.
But what is your expertise?
Well, I'm not a pilot, if that's what you're getting at. But
no, I'm not asking.
Are you saying that
that
only experts are allowed to have an opinion on the planes? Is that what you're saying?
Well, I don't see people going on the internet and saying that 3,000 people didn't die and that there was nothing in between the restaurant on top and the ground floor of the Twin Towers. I've never heard that before. No,
and you probably haven't seen the image either. There's an image on the internet which shows those buildings, and it looks as though they are empty. Okay, the sunlight is behind the buildings, and it appears to show empty floors between the top and the bottom floor. You probably haven't seen that image.
Listen,
now I'm not going to sit here and grill you and tell you that you have to go and look at the image before you can have an opinion. If your opinion is that the buildings were full, that's your opinion. That's okay. I thought that was the whole idea of the show, was people have opinions.
Well, they do, but there's logical opinions, and then there's sheer stupidity. And in my opinion, this interview is over because it's sheer stupidity. Oh my God, can you believe that, X-Zone Nation? You've got an idiot, I mean a bloody idiot, who's telling you that 9/11 never happened. Oh, no, the aircraft could not do that. like, where the hell does this guy come from anyway? I think there must be something in the Aussie water that he's drinking that is a little out of whack. Can you just imagine that? He makes all these statements based on his opinion that this did not happen. Give your head a shake, mister. You really don't know what the hell you're talking about. And I figure I've wasted nearly 45 minutes on this, and I'm not going to waste another minute. When we come back, more of the X Zone, I hope, with people who are a lot more logical and sincere than this last guest was. I'll be back on the other side of this break. Whatever you, don't go away. My name is Rob McConnell. This is the X Zone, and we're coming to you from our broadcast center and studios in Hamilton, Ontario.